So, Ray, how embarrassing is it for Blinken, for the Department of State, and for the Biden administration, for CIA Director Bill Burns effectively to go to the same places that Blinken had just gone to 2 days after Blinken got home? Ostensibly, I would imagine, and you correct me if I'm wrong or amplify on this, please, as you see fit, to do what Blinken failed to do.
Well, Judge, I'm going to cite an instructive apocryphal story about a West Point reunion 30 years after graduation, where a major general confronted a fellow that had left after 5 years. And he said, "What are you doing now, Elmer?" And Elmer says, "Oh, I've got a job with the circus." "What do you do?" "Well, I clean up after the elephants, after the performance." I said, "Elmer, you come work for Raytheon where I am. You don't have to do it." And Elmer said, "What? And get away from showbiz? Leave showbiz?" That's Bill Burns to a T. He didn't want to leave showbiz. Okay, so he's cleaning up after Blinken, after this circus, aptly described by my friends. You know, this is a really a debacle, and it all has to do. And again, I mean, it seems strange, but Blinken really believes that he can work his will because he's the United States, not only with the Arabs but the Israelis, and he can't. And so here goes Bill Burns to clap, and then to give Biden the appearance that they're working really hard on the hostages. And who does he show up in Qatar with? With the head of Mossad. Now, there they are. Whoop, there he's right in the corner there, the head of Mossad. So the head of the CIA and the head of Mossad are openly pressuring the Qatar people to release the hostages.
So how
that's
can
some
how
of the Hamas
can
people are.
Ray? How can the director of CIA get?
Well, he can't. He could do that if it was a secret sort of thing. He has performed, that is, Bill Burns has, in the past, some rather discreet diplomacy having to do with the accord on Iran's nuclear weaponry. So he's been able to do this, but that hasn't been on the front page with together with the head of Mossad. So, you know, this is just an advertisement for Biden to say, "Look, what we're doing, we can to get the hostages out." It is for Burns to try to clean up. Now, he had an audience with the head of Egypt, al-Sisi, and it went really, really bad. The head of intelligence was there, but al-Sisi says, "Look, meeting touched on regional issues." Al-Sisi reiterated that we need a ceasefire right away, and we need to facilitate unfettered flow of humanitarian aid. And Mr. Burns said that we're committed to continued communication channels with Egypt. So, if he's going to try to do
he didn't get the first base.
That's exactly right.
Dmitry Peskov earlier today on this very topic with these very lines that you've summarized, Ray. Chris, number 9.
However, there are international experts who believe that if Trump resolves the issue of Greenland's annexation, he will undoubtedly go down in history, and not only in the history of the United States, but in world history as well. And I repeat once again, without discussing whether this is good or bad, it's hard to disagree with these experts. That's probably all that can be said on this topic.
We'll go down in history. Of course, he recently apparently told the Prime Minister of Norway that without the Nobel Prize, he's no longer interested in peace.
Judge, I hold no brief for Trump, nor for Putin, but there is such a thing as realpolitik. And what Putin is trying to do is keep his powder dry until he completely wins in Ukraine, and Trump will have to come around. And meanwhile, NATO is no more as a viable entity. It never was as a military entity over the last 5 years. And now it's shown to be, well, here are the Germans. What did they do? On Friday, they sent troops to Greenland. How many? 15 men and women troops. Oh, when did they come back? Sunday. Oh, why? Well, the German Defense Ministry said they blamed it on the weather. There was not good weather in Greenland, so we withdrew our sizable contingent.
Yeah, really ridiculous. Obviously, it was symbolic, but the symbolism was absurd for the reasons you've just demonstrated.
Not only absurd, but if you want to tweak Trump, and it succeeded, Trump immediately leveled 10% more tariffs on those 8 countries. Now, what were they? Finland, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, the Netherlands, France, Germany, and Britain. 10%, okay? And if they don't shape up on June 1st, 25%. 25% more? Or no, we don't know. It's 25% the 1st of June. It's just sort of crazy, but the Europeans are shown to be feckless and helpless, and they will, in my view, no doubt acquiesce in this seizure of part of NATO without a fight. They don't really have any option, and that's one reason why realpolitik Russians look on it and say, well, okay, you got to admire this guy. He's done it without a fight, and he'll go down in history as having enlarged the United States larger than the Louisiana Purchase, for God's sake, and much larger than Alaska.
Trump critical of Putin, and then we'll listen to these actual words which you've just so nicely summarized. So, Chris, cut number 9.
And I was disappointed in a certain way, some of the things that were said over the last day or two having to do with Zelensky, because when he considers Zelensky not credible, he's supposed to be making a deal with him, whether you like him or you don't like him. So I wasn't happy with that, but I think he's going to be good. And I certainly wouldn't want to put secondary tariffs on Russia, but if they were put on, it would not be very good for them.
I don't think President Putin could care less about tariffs or more sanctions. And I think President Trump is either pretending to be unaware or is truly unaware of how well Russia has prospered under the sanctions. But getting back to what President Putin said, here's the core of what he said. It's a very, very articulate explanation. Cut number 15.
The current civil authorities in Ukraine have no legitimacy in accordance with the country's constitution. Ukraine has held no presidential election, while according to the constitution, all key officials are to be appointed by the president, including regional government bodies, governors, and so on. So if the president is illegitimate, so are all the others. So under these circumstances of de facto illegitimacy, neo-Nazi formations receive additional weapons and recruit new personnel. What does this lead to? What could it lead to? It results in de facto power being in their hands. This in turn means that it is already unclear with whom to sign documents and what effect such documents might carry. For tomorrow, new leaders may come to power through elections and declare, "We do not know who signed those papers, so goodbye." The issue is not just this uncertainty. It is that these neo-Nazi formations, such as Azov, among others, are effectively beginning to run the country. This raises the question, how is it possible to conduct negotiations with them? In such situations, international practice follows a well-established path. Within the framework of the United Nations peacekeeping operations, there have been several cases of what is termed external governance or temporary administration. This occurred in East Timor, I believe in 1999, in parts of the former Yugoslavia, and in New Guinea. In short, such precedents exist.
I think he's got a terrific handle on what's going on there. That is a brilliant, in my view, and lucid explanation of the dangers of negotiating with Vladimir Zelensky. Your thoughts, Ray?
I think when they talk, probably later this week, Putin will have a chance to school Trump on what's really happened here, and to persuade Trump, and the evidence is legion, that the Nazis are really in control. The Nazis, aided and abetted by MI6, the British intelligence service. One sidelight here is that to the degree Trump succeeds in declassifying all those Russiagate documents, it will show that the British were involved deeply in all this stuff from the very outset, and they tried to do Trump in before he became elected, and then cooperated in the effort of Russiagate. So the British and the Nazis are together here, and here is Putin trying to find a third way, okay? And as I say, I fully expect the Chinese Wang Yi, the foreign minister, very adept with Lavrov in Moscow next week, to be putting together a little package that they'll surface at the UN Security Council, a package that makes good sense, eminent good sense, and has some promise of circumventing this business about denazification.
Right.
You remember that from the very outset, Putin said, look, we have a twin aim in this special military operation. Demilitarization, that's about done. Denazification, that's worse. So that's why he's focusing on this. And with respect to moving toward the Dnieper or finishing off the job, I just can't omit this passage of what he told those sailors. What's happening today, it is very clear. Along the entire line of contact, our troops have a strategic initiative. I just recently said, we will finish them off, period. Okay. There are reasons to believe that we will finish them off. I only think that the Ukrainian people should realize what is happening, what this means to them. So they are finishing them off. That's the background here. That's the context. They're in no rush, and they're saying, look, Mr. Trump, this is going to drag on for another year. Witness the fact that
the emotional difference between them is remarkable, Putin and Trump. Putin is immensely patient, and Trump is immensely impatient. I mean, this is obvious to a school child, much less those of us.
Yeah, he's not getting his way, And when one of the Russian negotiators in Saudi Arabia made a statement just 2 days ago, saying, this is going on for a year or more. I mean, this is really difficult, and these things are not intractable, but it's going to take a really long time. Kurasin is his name. Well, that pissed Trump off, to use his expression. Right. When he gets a little real, when hopefully real analysts show him that the reality here is that he's got no cards on the battlefield, and that to the degree he can recognize the problem with the Nazis, well, that's got to be addressed. And this is one imaginative. Now, Putin said, this is not the only way we could do this, but this is new. Let's consider it. So there's a new proposal on the table. I hope it gets some lift by people who really matter in the world.
It's the worst, in Ambassador Freeman's view, Secretary of State in the modern, that is post-World War II era, although he may actually have said the worst Secretary of State ever, which goes back to Thomas Jefferson. Cut number 6.
If this gets to a place where there is a ceasefire, and it's a ceasefire that's on just and durable terms, that would be a good thing. But for it to be durable, there has to be some kind of assurance that Russia's not simply going to rest, refit, and reattack in a year, 2 years, 5 years. That's going to be critical. If we get that, Ukraine is on a path to success. It's a country that is standing strongly as an independent country. It was not erased from the map. That's what Putin wanted to do. He's failed. It can stand strongly on its own feet, militarily, economically, democratically. That's the best possible rebuke to Putin. And I know President Trump will want to get a good deal going forward.
Does he believe? Wait, you're not a shrink. You're a brilliant guy, Ray. You're not a shrink. Does he believe what he says?
God knows. The essence of this whole thing is that in return for a ceasefire initially, the Russians need, well, what they really need is some assurance that they'll be taken seriously, right? And as is said here in this one memo here, a long-term moratorium on membership in NATO. Now, that's a strong desire by the Russians, but if NATO is going to fall apart in the next 10 years, there's a deal to be cut there. NATO is already falling apart. There are no governments in Germany or France to speak of. Fico from Slovakia is up there in Moscow yesterday talking about gas deliveries and also talking about Ukraine. Italy is a dubious thing. There are lots of stuff. Ukraine, my God, NATO is falling apart. Putin recognizes that. Will he let them down gently? I think he will. Will he insist that all Ukrainian forces leave those 4 provinces? Yeah, eventually. I think that's negotiable too. You know, they only have little slices of Donetsk. What's to prevent a deal? Okay, we won't go to the Dnieper all the way. We'll deal until we get a ceasefire. I think that's negotiable. Again, I'm an outlier here, and it wouldn't be the first time I was wrong. But I think it's a mistake to dismiss these guys who are still spouting propaganda, like Kellogg, and say, well, when he goes to Moscow, they won't like him. Well, it depends on what he has as a portfolio when he goes to Moscow. And I think there'll be terms that they can actually talk about and negotiate.
Yes.
Putin has failed, and he continues to fail.
Putin has already lost.
Putin's already lost the war.
Putin has already lost this war. I want to say that, and I want to say it loudly.
Putin has already lost in terms of what he was trying to achieve.
In many ways, Putin has already lost.
And that is Russia has already lost this war.
In short, Russia has lost. They've lost strategically, operationally, and tactically.
Do these guys have any reverence for the truth or ability to acknowledge they didn't know what the hell they were talking about?
I'm reminded of Julius Caesar and Shakespeare. You know, what is truth? Quid est veritas. The truth is what you want it to be. The problem is that most Americans don't know the truth, largely because the New York Times and others are cooperating consciously with distorting the truth. Now, I mentioned this David Arachamia, okay, the chief negotiator. Now, when was he appointed to negotiate with the Russians? The 28th of February, 2022. That means 4 days after the beginning of the war. Did he go to Belarus? He did. He negotiated. Then he went down to Turkey in Istanbul and came very close to an agreement. He said on the 28th of March, he said, we're really very close to an agreement. And in April, he said, Russia has agreed to almost all of Ukraine's peace proposals. We don't know about whether the US and the UK will agree or not. Whoa, that's Arachamia. Now, what happened next? Boris Johnson was sent by the UK and the US. He arrived in Kiev on the 9th of April, put the kibosh on the whole thing. The New York Times has a major article, 2 major articles on this yesterday in the Sunday Times. No mention, search in vain for a mention of Boris Johnson and the way he put the kibosh on this whole thing. So Americans are led to believe as they, here it is. Here's the headline in the New York Times yesterday, the big thing that spread all over page 10, 11. Ukraine-Russia peace is elusive as ever. It's elusive as ever because the representatives of the warring nations, they held peace talks, but they fizzled. You know why they fizzled? Because they resorted to military action. And that's just the other way around. They were successful, and we have the documents, for God's sake. But Johnson came in, told Zelensky. Zelensky was stupid enough to rely on Western promises, and they went to war. Admittedly, say, no, we're going to follow this militarily. We depend, the U.S. says that they're with us for as long as it takes. We'll do it. Now, Judge, if I get a little emotional about this, I care about 500,000 young Ukrainian dead now, and their mothers and their other relatives. They would not be dead if that agreement was allowed to go through between Russia and Ukraine. And again, the cardinal, the sine qua non for Russia was given by these Ukrainian negotiators, and that is no Ukraine in NATO.
I'm going to make you feel a little better. I don't usually read aloud what the viewers write in, but Lenny 1777 writes this. Ray McGovern keeps getting younger each time he goes live with Judge Napolitano.
That's good news.
Well, I couldn't resist because I know you got a little emotional there.